Many people have referred to what's going on right now with impeachment as a coup. In a town hall meeting, a moderate Democrat talked about joining the side of impeachment, and one of her constituents said, "You are joining a coup against our president." In this article written by Matt Taibbi, a very well-respected journalist, contributing editor to Rolling Stone, and a well-known political reporter, says, "We're in a permanent coup. Americans might soon wish they just waited to vote their way out of the Trump era." The article's actually fascinating and quite terrifying. Matt Taibbi explains how the similarities between the actual coups he's experienced are not too dissimilar to what we're experiencing now. Now let's rewind the clock a little bit. We'll talk about Tim Pool's bombastic approach to the political controversy when he called it a civil war. I have referred several times to a potential civil war. And what Matt Taibbi, I assume, doesn't quite understand is that what he wrote is not about a permanent coup against Donald Trump. The story talks about, intelligence agencies that want to go after the president, that they're trying to remove him at all costs. And he knows what this leads to. But what he doesn't come to the conclusion that he's not talking about a coup. He's talking about civil war. And I really do mean this. And I'll give you the point straight up. I'm not going to wait. When he goes on and says that there are, key officials arguing that certain people should be arrested and that media companies are hiring former intelligence officials to make claims and accusations against the president to try and remove him, and this cycle continues with Russiagate to Ukrainegate, he talks about how at some point somebody makes a phone call and starts counting heads. Who's on whose side? If we ever come to the point, as potentially suggested by Matt Taibbi, that someone in government tries to remove by force another person in government, Rashida Tlaib said that as much as this, it's not going to be a coup. It's not going to be a small faction of people in government who are saying it's time for Trump to leave. With the impeachment inquiry and no formal vote, Trump has issued a statement saying absolutely not. This is beyond precedent, and you are not giving me fair due process. So what do you think happens when Rashida Tlaib says, "I want Barr arrested," and orders DC police to go and do it, as she has suggested? I'm not making this up. What do you think happens? Well, Bill Barr will refute this. Absolutely not. Now, based on those circumstances and the stories we've seen in the past, Matt Taibbi's assessment that it's a permanent coup makes sense. But then you must consider the fact that it's not just politicians taking action. It's that they are backed by large amounts of people. And that's where you go from coup to civil war. I'm not saying people in the streets with guns fighting at each other. I'm saying if it comes to the point where you right now, as I believe it was Scott Adams, assessment, he says you've got one screen that everyone's watching, but they're seeing two different movies. You see, in one circumstance, the conservatives are saying Donald Trump is going after the corrupt DNC who worked with Ukraine. We have stories to back it up. You see the left saying, no, Donald Trump is trying to dig up dirt on a political rival using a foreign government to benefit him. It doesn't matter who's right. It matters that you have two very large factions of people who both know they are right. And politics is downstream from culture. So in the cultural world, when they see this news, and again, you might be sitting there saying, "I'm right, I know I'm right, you're wrong." Doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't care who's right or wrong. All that matters is the divide exists. People who believe they're 100% absolutely right. Either the orange man is a corrupt, evil man, or he's here to help save America and weed out the corruption. Pick one. I know it's in real life. In reality, it's not black and white like that, but you do have these overarching themes. Now take someone like Nancy Pelosi, who insists Trump must be investigated, impeached. Then you have Trump saying it's unfair, there's no due process. What happens then? When someone says, "That's it, we've concluded our assessment, Trump must be arrested." Well, that's when things get hairy. Because it's not just about, as I stated earlier, a small group of people making this demand. It's that Nancy Pelosi is acting based on what she assumes is the popular opinion. The divide is getting so great, it is now reaching political proportions. It has for a while, but we're going to get to that point. And trust me, I hope we don't. But Rashida Tlaib saying she's looking to arrest White House officials, I'll tell you, when that happens, when those police show up, you're going to start seeing what Matt Taibbi discusses, the counting of heads, who's on whose sides, who controls what. That's not a coup. That's how civil war starts. Hopefully it doesn't happen here. But here's what we're going to do. I know I kind of went through a lot because I wanted to get the gist of this right up, right away. But let's read Matt Taibbi's, for the most part, we'll read his assessment about this permanent coup. And before we get started, I want to stress I am reticent to say coup or to even say civil wars. I've always tried saying, listen, I'm not saying it'll be traditional. I'm trying to walk things back. But as much as the mainstream media will say, look at this bombastic rhetoric, and what are these people saying? They're attacking Fox News because Fox mentioned something similar. Listen, man, I hope I'm wrong, okay? And it's possible I am. That's fine. But it doesn't mean we ignore what's right in front of our faces. With Matt Taibbi writing this article, I was actually a bit shocked and scared. I'm scared because I think seeing this from him shows I was right. Or at least it's another sign that I was right. I'm not the only one who thinks this. Matt Taibbi is not some fringe character. He's a well-respected journalist. Let's read his story. Before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's multiple ways you can give: cryptocurrency, PayPal, a physical address. But of course, the best thing you can do, seriously, share this video. I don't have a big marketing budget, but I am competing against CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and they do get an algorithmic boost on YouTube. But we can counteract that. We don't need big marketing budgets. All you got to do, share this video, explain what you think is important about it, what you agree or disagree with, and we'll start a conversation, and that really helps. Let's read. Matt Taibbi writes, I've lived through a few coups. They're insane, random, and terrifying. Like watching sports, except your political future depends on the score. The kickoff begins when a key official decides to buck the executive. From that moment, government becomes a high-speed head-counting exercise. Who's got the power plant, the airport, the police in the Capitol? How many department chiefs are answering their phones? Who's writing tonight's newscast? When the KGB in 1991 tried to reassume control of the crumbling Soviet Union by placing Mikhail Gorbachev under arrest and attempting to seize Moscow, logistics ruled. Boris Yeltsin's crew drove to the Russian White House in ordinary cars, beating KGB coup plotters who were trying to reach the seat of Russian government in armored vehicles. A key moment came when one of Yeltsin's men, Alexander Rutskoy, who 2 years later would himself lead a coup against Yeltsin, prevailed upon a major in a tank unit to defy KGB orders and turn on the, quote, criminals. We have long been spared this madness in America. Our head-counting ceremony was Election Day. We did it once every 4 years. That's all over in the Trump era. Now, I will stress, the moment he's citing in the Soviet Union was not a civil war. It was just the collapse of their government. And it changed, and it moved on, and there wasn't widespread violence. The reason why I mention this, I think Matt Taibbi, maybe he knows this, maybe he doesn't, but we're seeing people fight in the streets. We just saw dozens of Trump supporters attacked in the streets outside of the Minnesota Trump rally. Personalities on the left called Fox irresponsible for pointing out the violence, saying, what violence? No one was reported injured. But you can actually watch the videos. This brings me back to the same screen, two movies analogy. If you have people in powerful positions in the media telling all of those anti-Trump types, they're lying, there's no violence, Antifa is good and just, like CNN has done, relating Antifa to the soldiers on D-Day. Well, they're going to be convinced they know the truth. But then we watch those videos, we see the violence, and they say, yeah, but the violence is justified. That's what Antifa says when they finally come around. The problem is, there are two realities. And when it comes to that point where two cars pull up to the White House trying to figure out who's going to get to that phone and make that call and say, here's who's in charge, you are going to have millions of people on both sides who refuse to accept it. And I'll tell you this, with the widespread violence we've seen from Antifa, I do believe violence is a strong possibility. It may be insurgent. It may not be, it may be that the right does take over, in terms of like a complete breakdown, the right faction retains power or whatever, however you want to describe it. But then you will see Antifa refuse. We've already come to the point where they believe Trump is pure evil, must be removed at all costs, even if that means underhanded tactics. We're getting to that point when Rashid Tlaib says we're discussing how to arrest these people, that we will come to physical executive action. I don't mean executive in the branch. I mean someone saying straight up, enough, I am going to have someone go in and shut this down. And at that point, people will ask, which side are you on? That terrifies me. I hope I'm wrong, but let's read. On Thursday, news broke that two businessmen said to have peddled supposedly explosive information about corruption involving Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden were arrested at Dulles Airport on, quote, campaign finance violations. The two figures are alleged to be bagmen bearing dirt on Democrats solicited by Trump and his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman will be asked to give depositions to impeachment investigators. They're reportedly going to refuse. Their lawyer, John Dowd, also says they will refuse to appear before House committees investigating President Donald Trump. Fruman and Parnas, meanwhile, claim they had real derogatory information about Biden and other politicians. But the U.S. government has shown little interest in receiving it through official channels. For Americans not familiar with the language of the third world, that's two contrasting denials of political legitimacy. The men who are the proxies for Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani in this story are asserting that official channels have been corrupted. The forces backing impeachment, meanwhile, are telling us those same defendants are obstructing a lawful impeachment inquiry. Well, here's the problem. They didn't vote on it. Which side are you on? It doesn't matter what's true. You might say, Tim, you're wrong. I know exactly what the Democrats are doing. You might say, Tim, no, you need to state the facts. Trump is corrupt. I have had so many tweets at me saying, I can't wait till Tim realizes Trump is a fraud. I've never liked the guy. I'm just trying to figure out what's true. In the end, you might know in your heart of hearts what is really going on. And that means the other person who thinks the exact same thing, that they know exactly what's going on, will refuse to listen. And that's scary. This latest incident, set against the impeachment mania and the reportedly expanding Russiagate investigation of U.S. Attorney John Durham, accelerates our timeline to chaos. We are speeding toward a situation when someone in one of these camps refuses to obey a major decree, arrest order, or court decision, at which point Americans will get to experience the joys of their political futures being decided by phone calls to generals and police chiefs. Ocasio-Cortez defying court precedent. She's not allowed to block people. It has begun. You might say, who cares if she's blocking people on Twitter? It's a minor court case. Minor court cases happen all the time. I know. I'm hoping that these small instances where, say, Ocasio-Cortez says, I'm not going to unblock people even though Trump has to. I hope that's a slow, gradual build to the point where nothing outrageous happens. There is an easing in the transfer of power, whoever it might be from, and we move on from this. But I'm worried that people are going to refuse. It was the left that went after Trump over his Twitter blocking, and court precedent was set. They ruled, Trump, you've lost appeal, you must unblock. AOC says no. Well, what then? When it is the left itself demanding Trump take an action that AOC then refuses to take herself, you can see that people are going to say, if you won't play by the rules, neither will I. And while, again, this may be just Twitter and it may seem like nothing, that mentality and those actions, they can escalate. Taibbi continues, my discomfort in the last few years, first with Russiagate and now with Ukrainegate and impeachment, stems from the belief that the people pushing hardest for Trump's early removal are more dangerous than Trump. Many Americans don't see this because they're not used to waking up in a country where you're not sure who the president will be by nightfall. They don't understand that this predicament is worse than having a bad president. I was in Egypt during the fall of, I believe, Morsi. So Mubarak was outed. I was not there. But I came back because another revolution was occurring. This time, Morsi, Muslim Brotherhood, who was elected, was being protested, and they demanded his removal as well. And I remember being scared, terrified, when Egyptian military started going into newsrooms and arresting people and shutting things down. And I was there with Vice, and I didn't know if there would be a knock on my door, and Egyptian authorities would be saying, we're taking the journalists, we're taking you all. So I took security precautions, but I assure you, one of the scariest things you can experience is complete uncertainty in authority and what's going to happen. People were in the streets. There were thousands. The military was driving around in APCs. They were shutting down bridges, and we got out. It is not a pleasant experience. And I hope Matt Taibbi and myself, I hope we're wrong. I hope we're seeing the worst case scenario. But Matt brings some very important points to this discussion that make me think we're right and things are getting really bad. The Trump presidency is the first to reveal a full-blown schism between the intelligence community and the White House. Senior figures in the CIA, NSA, FBI, and other agencies made an open break from their would-be boss before Trump's inauguration, commencing a public war of leaks that has not stopped. The first big shot was fired in early January 2017 via CNN. A headline, Intel chiefs presented Trump with claims of Russian efforts to compromise him. This tale about the January 7th presentation of former British spy Christopher Steele's report to then-President-elect Trump began as follows. Classified documents presented last week to President Obama and President-elect Trump included allegations that Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. Multiple U.S. officials with direct knowledge of the briefings tell CNN. Four intelligence chiefs in the FBI's James Comey, the CIA's John Brennan, the NSA's Mike Rogers, and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper presented an incoming president with a politically disastrous piece of information. In this case, a piece of a private opposition research report. Among other things, because the news dropped at the same time BuzzFeed decided to publish the entire bombshell Steele dossier, reporters spent the week obsessing not about the mode of the story's release, but about the claims. In particular, audiences were wrapped by allegations that Russians were trying to blackmail Trump with evidence of a golden shower party commissioned on a bed once slept upon by Barack Obama himself. Twitter exploded. No other news story mattered. For the next 2 years, the claims of compromise and a continuing Trump-Russia exchange hung over the White House like a sword of Damocles. Well, like the sword of Damocles. Few were interested in the motives for making the story public. As it turned out, there were two explanations. One that was made public, and one that only came out later. The public justification, as outlined in the CNN piece, was to make the president-elect aware that such allegations involving him were circulating among intelligence agencies. However, we know from Comey's January 7th, 2017 memo to Deputy Andrew McCabe and FBI General Counsel James Baker, there was another explanation. Quote, I said I wasn't saying this was true, only that I wanted Trump to know both that it had been reported and that the reports were in many hands. I said media like CNN had them and were looking for a news hook. I said it was important that we not give them an excuse to write that the FBI has the material or redacted, and that we were keeping it very close hold. Imagine if a similar situation had taken place in January of 2009, involving President-elect Barack Obama. Picture a meeting between Obama and the heads of the CIA, NSA, and FBI, along with the DIA, in which the newly elected president is presented with a report compiled by, say, Judicial Watch, accusing him of links to Al-Qaeda. Imagine further that they tell Obama they are presenting him with this information to make him aware of a blackmail threat and to reassure him they won't give news agencies a hook to publish the news. Now imagine if that news came out on Fox days later. Imagine further that within a year, one of the four officials became a paid Fox contributor. Democrats would lose their minds in this set of circumstances. The country mostly did not lose its mind, however, because the episode did not involve a traditionally presidential figure like Obama, nor was it understood to have been directed at the institution of the White House. Instead, it was a story about an infamously corrupt individual, Donald Trump, a woman-grabbing scammer who bragged about using bankruptcy to escape debt and publicly praised Vladimir Putin. Audiences believed the allegations against this person and saw the intelligence/counterintelligence community as acting patriotically, doing their best to keep us informed about a still-breaking investigation of a rogue president. But a parallel story was ignored. Leaks from the intelligence community most often pertain to foreign policy. The leak of the January 2017 meeting between the four chiefs and Trump, which without question damaged both the presidency and America's standing abroad, was an unprecedented act of insubordination. And I want to stop here. This is going to be a long video, a very long one. In this instance, we can see Taibbi writing about this fracture at a certain level. Now, the culture war has existed for a while, and not everything aligns perfectly. There are many people who consider themselves hardcore nationalists who are aligned with the anti-social justice crowd, even though many anti-SJWs care very little for nationalist versus globalist policy. It's not perfect. But in this, we can see the media latching onto the anti-Trump rhetoric. We can see the factions have allies. They form larger and larger factions. It doesn't matter if you think this is true or not. Again, I'll say it for the millionth time. It matters that these people claimed they had the information. They claimed it was going to be bad for Trump. And then they went and got hired by the news media, and the rhetoric came out. And now you have two worlds. Taibbi continues. It was also a bold new foray into domestic politics by intelligence agencies that in recent decades began asserting all sorts of frightening new authority. They were kidnapping foreigners, assassinating by drone, conducting paramilitary operations without congressional notice. building an international archipelago of secret prisons, and engaging in mass warrantless surveillance of Americans. We found out in a court case just last week how extensive the illegal domestic surveillance has been, with the FBI engaging in tens of thousands of warrantless searches involving American emails and phone numbers under the guise of combating foreign subversion. It's amazing to me, isn't it? I should say it's amazing. I remember back in the day during Occupy, the scrutiny that the activists had for the FBI and the CIA, and something weird happened. When these agencies came out against Trump, and many on the left cherished them and defended them. It was a shock to me. You can see the prevailing factions. The agency's new trick is inserting themselves into domestic politics using leaks and media pressure. The, quote, intel chiefs meeting was just the first in a series of similar stories, many following the pattern in which a document was created, passed from department to department, and leaked. Taibbi goes on to give numerous examples when all of this happened. And it's fascinating to me. Let's read just one. January 19th, 2019. Former law enforcement officials and others familiar with the investigation tell the New York Times the FBI opened an inquiry into the explosive implications of whether or not Donald Trump was working on behalf of the Russians. That story goes viral. We saw so many stories go viral, retracted a day later. And as we know now, that story was not true. Trump did not work with the Russians. But Ukrainegate is the new iteration. Again, we can see whistleblowers who, check this out. The whistleblower in the center of all of this Ukrainegate worked with Joe Biden at the Obama White House. This from Town Hall. How about this? Adam Schiff has 2 aides who worked with whistleblower at the White House. Is it a coincidence? How about this? Adam Schiff claimed he said we did not have contact with the whistleblower. Facts first. They did. I can't tell you what's going on. I can only tell you there are 2 factions. And Matt Taibbi's article is probably one of the scariest things I've read in a long time. If I read something from some fringe personality, I'd say, yeah, I know, I get it. People think the deep state, Q, whatever. This is Matt Taibbi. When I saw this, it's almost like validating my worst fears. He goes on to say, to be sure, quote, people familiar with the matter leaked a lot of true stories in the last few years, but many were clearly problematic even at the time of release. Moreover, all took place in the context of constant hounding pressure from media figures, congressional allies like Democrats Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, as well as ex-officials who could make use of their personal public platforms, in addition to being unnamed sources in straight news reports. They used commercial news platforms to argue that Trump had committed treason, needing to be removed from office, and preferably also indicted as soon as possible. A shocking number of these voices were former intelligence officers who joined Clapper in becoming paid news contributors. Op-ed pages and news networks are packed now with ex-spooks, editorializing about stories in which they had personal involvement. Michael Morrell, Michael Hayden, Asha Rangappa, and Andrew McCabe, among many others, including especially all 4 of the original intel chiefs, Clapper, Rogers, Comey, and MSNBC headliner, John Brennan. This is not made up. Matt Taibbi is correct. Daily Caller reports 15 former spooks who work at CNN and MSNBC now. I'm not saying these people working in media are wrong. Again, I will stress, set aside your bias. I'm not going to tell you who's right, who's better, who should win. I'm telling you the divide exists, and we're reaching a tipping point. Pay attention. Russiagate birthed a whole brand of politics. A government in exile, which prosecuted its case against Trump via a constant stream of approved leaks, partisans in Congress, and an increasingly unified and thematically consistent set of commercial news outlets. These mechanisms have been transplanted now onto the Ukrainegate drama. It's the same people beating the public drums, with the messaging run out of the same congressional committees, through the same Nadlers, Schiffs, and Swalwells. The same news outlets are on full alert. The sidelined intel chiefs are once again playing central roles in making the public case. Comey says we may now be at a point where impeachment is necessary. Brennan, with unintentional irony, says the United States is no longer a democracy. Clapper says the Ukraine whistleblower complaint is one of the most credible he's seen. A whistleblower, mind you, who worked with Biden and who worked with 2 of the aides who are now employed by Adam Schiff. As a reporter covering the 2015-2016 presidential race, I thought Trump's campaign was disturbing on many levels, but logical as a news story. He succeeded for class reasons. because of flaws in the media business that gifted him mass amounts of coverage, and because he took cunning advantage of long-simmering frustrations in the electorate. He also clearly catered to racist fears and to the collapse in trust in institutions like the news media, the Fed, corporations, NATO, and yes, the intelligence services. In enormous numbers, voters rejected everything they had ever been told about who was and was not qualified for higher office. Trump's campaign antagonism toward the military and intelligence world was at best a millimeter thick. Like almost everything else he has said as a candidate, it was a gimmick designed to get votes. That he was insincere and full of it and irresponsible, at first at least, when he attacked the deep state and the fake news media, doesn't change the reality of what's happened since. Even paranoiacs have enemies, and even Donald Deep State Trump is a legitimately elected president whose ouster is being actively sought by the intelligence community. I stopped here when I read this, and I was worried. Matt Taibbi, of all people, saying this, that a duly elected president, legitimate president, that the intelligence community is seeking to ouster him, to me reeks of terrifying conspiracy theory. So I did the best I could to try and make sure this was legitimate. I went to Matt Taibbi's Twitter account to see if he had tweeted about this story. No, but he has a link to it in his profile, taibbi.substack.com. And when you open it up, sure enough, you are granted with this story from his verified Twitter profile, where he has 362,000 followers. I thought to myself, maybe Matt Taibbi isn't as credible as people say he is. Maybe he's just another weirdo. So I went to his Wikipedia page. Matt Taibbi is an American author and journalist. He has reported on politics, media, finance, and sports. He is currently a contributing editor for Rolling Stone. No, we're not looking at Alex Jones. We're looking at a well-established, high-profile journalist who's critical of Trump and is telling us right now, Donald Trump, a duly elected president, is being targeted by the intelligence community. They are trying to ouster him. To me, that's terrifying. It's terrifying because the conversation starts in the deepest corners of the internet. And now it's come to a point where high-profile mainstream journalists are telling us it's going to get worse. You don't want to live through a coup, but we're experiencing the beginning of it. The point I want to add, going back to the beginning of this, my assessment is, you may see it as a coup. You may see the intelligence agencies, but Matt, are you paying attention to the street level? What do you think happens when one of these players takes executive action and says it's time for him to be removed? Do you think the Trump supporters will sit idly by when you acknowledge they're trying to remove a legitimately elected president? I assure you they won't. Do you think Antifa will sit by when they fail to remove who they view as being deeply corrupt because American intelligence told them so? That is my fear. Now, will it result in standing armies? No, I don't think so. Civil war is not like that. We view it that way because we had a clear dividing line. But I think what we'll end up seeing is people in the streets wearing badges, wearing colors, with weapons. We've already seen it. The right and the left have their armed factions. We've seen the fights. The violence hasn't escalated beyond, two people attacking each other directly with Hold on. I'm trying to avoid being overly bombastic, but what I'm trying to say is the moment when people take those arms and point them in the other direction is when I get, that's the true terrifying moment. I mean, all of this is scary, but we have seen individuals firebomb ICE facilities and take, very dangerous stances. Let's continue. Trump stands accused of using the office of the presidency to advance political aims, in particular, pressuring Ukraine to investigate potential campaign rival Joe Biden. He's guilty, but the issue is how guilty in comparison to his accusers. And I'll stop there and say, yes, it was inappropriate. That's about how guilty I think Trump was. He's trying to go after those he views as corrupt. I don't think it's about the election, but here we have the divide once again. I assure you, there are people on the left who will tell me it is the most egregious violation. He's trying to subvert our elections. Where do we go from there? The only end is if we're on two different sides of this issue, either Trump must be removed or defended. And to me, it's truly a terrifying predicament if people have one side or the other regardless. Trump, at least insofar as we know, has not used Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to monitor political rivals. He hasn't deployed human counterintelligence informants to follow the likes of Hunter Biden. He hasn't maneuvered to secure special counsel probes of Democrats. And while Donald Trump conducting foreign policy based on what he sees on Fox and Friends is troubling, it's not in the same ballpark as CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, and the New York Times engaging in de facto coverage partnerships with the FBI and CIA to push highly politicized, phony narratives like Russiagate. Trump's tin pot Twitter threats and cancellation of White House privileges for dolts like Jim Acosta also don't begin to compare to the danger posed by Facebook, Google, and Twitter. Under pressure from the Senate, organizing with groups like the Atlantic Council to fight, quote, fake news in the name of preventing the foment of discord. He says, I don't believe most Americans would have thought through what a successful campaign to oust Donald Trump would look like. Most casual news consumers can only think of it in terms of Mike Pence becoming president. The real problem would be the precedent of a de facto intelligence community veto over elections, using the lunatic spook world brand of politics that has dominated the last 3 years of anti-Trump agitation. CIA, FBI-backed impeachment could also be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If Donald Trump thinks he's going to be jailed upon leaving office, he'll sooner or later figure out that his only real move is to start acting like the, quote, dictator MSNBC and CNN keep insisting he is. Why give up the White House? And why wait to be arrested when he still has theoretical authority to send special forces troops rappelling through the windows of every last Russiagate, Ukrainegate leaker? That would be the endgame in a third world country, and it's where we're headed, unless someone calls off this craziness. Welcome to the permanent power struggle. I will add, that's the conclusion of the article. And I'm not done. I've got a lot we have to go through. I will add to this now for the third or fourth time. When Trump does send those special forces rappelling through the windows, when allegiances are declared, what happens on the street? What do Trump supporters say? They say the deep state must be stopped. The people on the left say these crazy conspiracy theorists have subverted our democracy, and the fighting will start. As I showed you already, the whistleblower in Ukrainegate worked with Adam Schiff's aides. He hired one recently, the same month the whistleblower came forward. The whistleblower worked with Joe Biden. Adam Schiff lied. Schiff aides worked with whistleblower. Where do we go from here? I'll tell you what I think comes next. Why the rhetoric's already out there. We have this story from New York Post. Rashida Tlaib, Dems looking to arrest White House officials who ignore subpoenas. Something I mentioned in the past. What do you think happens when she actually says it must be done? They ignore the subpoena. Why right now Trump is ordering people not to go and testify. They're saying it's a violation. What happens? Do the DC police show up and say, put your hands behind your back? Do the DC police side against the Democrats and say, we will not take action against these authorities because of the precedent it will set and we don't want to destabilize this country? When they refuse to do that, what does the left say? Oh no, Trump has defied legal law and the police have sided with him. What comes next? I can't tell you. I don't know. I can tell you that we live in alternate realities. Now I'm going to wrap. We're going to be moving a little bit away from the talk of coup and civil war and into where the media takes this. Take a look at this story from reliable sources. It's CNN's newsletter about Shepard Smith's exit from Fox News, which I find sad, troubling. Shep Smith had a particularly left approach to many of the stories he covered. That's fine. The issue is that CNN and many on the left paint this as Shepard Smith rejecting Trumpian Fox News. I don't know how that's true at the same time when Trump is slamming Fox News. When Fox News is too far for both sides. This should be an example of how the divide has become just, I guess, untenable. CNN says Fox News has gone so far right in defending Trump, they refuse to back down. Trump says Fox News is working against us. They're not working for us anymore. Fox News in between the left and the right, and both saying they're too far. You know what that really means? If Fox News is in the middle and Fox News is too far, it means we know both sides are so far away from each other, they will never come together. Not even Fox News hiring Donna Brazile. It's not the first time Trump has slammed this, but there are a few other things I will highlight before we wrap this up. Remember this story about Jim Acosta and the White House aide. This was a good sign for us that things were going to get bad. It was a story in which a White House aide tried to take the microphone away from Jim Acosta. I got into some fights, verbal fights, altercations with individuals over what really happened. In my opinion, watching this, I believe that she was going to reach for the microphone and Jim Acosta went to push her arm away, but she grabbed on, so it pulled her down and they both jerked forward a little bit. For some reason, many people on the left saw this woman trying to yank the microphone away from him. My opinion, even if that was true, well, so be it. She's taken the mic away from him. Why is he gripping it and refusing to let go? But many people saw Jim Acosta use his arm to push her away. We couldn't agree. We couldn't agree on a video of what happened. And was a moment when I said, if we watch the same clip and can't agree on what we saw, there is literally nothing that can bring us together. Take that into consideration when we look at Matt Taibbi's article. That's scary, man. 'Cause I'll tell you what, people on the left will view the intelligence agencies as the heroes, the patriots fighting against the corrupt Donald Trump. And the Trump supporters will view it like the deep state subverting everything. And no matter what you say, it will never end that divide. So what happens? Will the left allow Trump to get reelected? Will the right allow Trump to be removed? I can't tell you. I'd be willing to bet if Trump was impeached, you would be much less likely to see the right stand up and do anything, to be honest. They wouldn't raise arms. It just depends on the severity. If they start arresting Trump officials, if they start levying accusations, if they deny due process, if they subvert the Constitution. Trump has accused the Democrats of denying due process in the impeachment inquiry by refusing to have a vote on it, meaning that Trump can't cross-examine. It means that they can't subpoena their own witnesses. And if this is the case, then the precedent has already begun. The Democrats say, we don't need to. Trump says, you do. Pick a side. I hope it doesn't come to this point. But with Rashida Tlaib's statement, I'm getting worried. With the violence in the street at Trump rallies, I'm getting worried. I think everything will come to a head after Trump gets reelected. Assuming he does. This video may turn out to be a joke in the annals of history. We may look back in 10 years and people might say Tim Pool was so dumb he couldn't see what was really going to happen. Nothing. We may look back and say, boy, he thought it was going to happen then, happened way sooner than that. They might look back on this video and say, it started 5 years before Tim even made this video. I have no idea. I don't. I only have the knowledge presented today, and I only have the limited knowledge I have from reading the stories I've read. Matt Taibbi's article about the coup is probably one of the most alarming things I've seen yet, and I kind of sat with my jaw hanging open when I saw this article being shared. This article was not shared to me by a conservative Trump supporter. It was shared to me by an anti-war progressive leftist who agreed. This is dangerous, and it's going to get bad. And that's why, and one of the reasons why I've said over and over again, Trump must be removed through the electoral process. And if he wins, so be it. We cannot allow our institutions to decay through intelligence leaks and partisan news that seeks to make money. But I think we're going that direction no matter what, and people are attacking each other in the streets. Now look, most of these instances we've seen have been Trump supporters getting attacked, not doing the attacking. I want to make sure that's clear. Like in Minnesota. Trump will hold a rally in Chicago. This story from the Chicago Sun-Times. And I'm genuinely concerned. Disconcerted, I should say. We'll see what happens. Let me know if you think I'm insane. Let me know if you think, you know what? I'm not quite done. I do have one more thing to show you. In everything that's happened, we see this story. Fox host warns of emotional civil war because of what happened in Minnesota. I've been saying it for a while, and I'll tell you this. I have made many predictions. Many have been wrong. I've taken many strategies, most of which have been right. The companies I've worked for, the success I've had, the moves I've made and the places I've gone to, the things I've filmed. I've had a pretty good track record of erring on the side that tends to be the right one. I don't mean morally right. I mean, if you're going to tell me, which path will lead you to success. I was told by one very well-respected journalist that I have the unfortunate privilege of being ahead of the market. I was doing on-the-ground mobile live streaming, one of the first, if not the first in the US, getting prominence for it at least, or doing commentary on the ground. I wasn't the first person to do mobile live streaming. One of the first people to use drones, especially, I believe I was the first to do a live broadcast to be a drone. We hacked it. It was a really crazy thing we did, using the software development kit of the AR Parrot and then streaming the captured video. It was incredible. In all of this, in my success, the reason I was successful with Vice, for instance, was that I knew where to be before the news broke. They would say, what should we cover? And I would say, we have to get on the ground here. Not every place I chose turned out to be the biggest story in the world, but it typically did. And many of the stories I covered were the biggest that Vice had at the time. Millions of views on Ukraine, the coverage of Venezuela, I was forced to flee. Ferguson, for instance, they didn't even want to buy me the ticket. I flew myself there, and then the story broke. When I look at the news, and I see what's happening in these different cities, these different countries, and I say, this is the place we're going to fly to because next week X will happen. I've been fairly correct. There's some instances where I went, nothing really happened. I went to Brazil one time and the protests fizzled out. I went to Turkey and the protests fizzled out. But I would say about 75% of the time we'd go somewhere and then it would ignite and it would be the biggest story. I could see it coming. That's why I've been successful. I knew where to go on the ground to be that person. And people would say, Tim's everywhere. It wasn't that I was everywhere. It's that I knew where to be. Well, something changed. The divide in this country started getting worse. I started looking at what's happening in the world, and I saw the place to be was my own country. The stories around the world, while important, Hong Kong, for instance, I'm looking here in the US and seeing exactly what I saw in many of these other places. I'm not always right, but I tend to be. I tend to err on, I tend to bet well. I don't think I'm the smartest person in the world. It might be 51% out of 49% that I get it right. That's all I'm saying. But this is what I'm seeing now. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am. But apparently Matt Taibbi agrees to a certain extent that something bad is coming. He's comparing what we're seeing with Trump to the coups in the third world. That's worrying. Street violence is erupting. That's worrying. People on the left are acting like it didn't happen. They're telling people there were no injuries. Nothing happened. Who do you believe? I have no idea. The next segment will be coming up at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all there.